Saturday?
Wednesday and Saturday. So I've
Wow.
been busy. And then Saturday I went into I went into my office and tried to do a little photo shoot and gave up in disgust because my belly is so big. Like
Oh,
disgusting. so so what I'm gonna do today, I asked my daughter if she'd be my model.
oh, for
Yeah,
what?
so we're gonna redo those pictures
So
of
that it's not, so
of the
that the
yeah. So
exercises are like this.
yeah.
Oh, nice.
So I'm gonna redo that whole or most of it or some of it or all of it today. And so I'm kind of gonna get some things figured out, and we're gonna clear a space in the living room and set up some lights and stuff, and
Oh, nice.
try to get the setup right. And then I don't know, depending upon how it goes, might even do a video or two.
Wow, nice.
Uh, so that's on the slate for today. So
Good.
that's looking good. And I've been working on my workshop, the energy one,
Mm-hmm.
and it's coming along. It's just
You want to show it to me? Or
yeah, I can. Yeah, absolutely. Would you like to see?
sure.
It's changed a little bit since you saw it last, but not totally. So let me share the screen, huh?
Yep.
Okay.
Brow. I see me.
Okay. You seen the screen yet?
Energy posture. Yep. The energy of posture.
Let me switch this into full screen.
Isn't that done with the little dots?
Of
You know, the green and the orange and
huh?
the green and the orange and the red dots
Green and orange and red
in the
dots.
upper left.
Um,
I don't know,
I
Mac.
can do that.
Yeah, that
Oh, I
should
guess
do
I
that.
will.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's take a look at this a little bit. Uh, so just kind of going through a little bit of what fascia is. I added in a slide here that shows the layers of fascia. Um, and what it does. You know this, right?
Mm-hmm. This was on your
Movement and
first
balance.
draft. Yep.
Yeah. And I added in this, which shows the difference between superficial and deep fascia. So superficial is basically what's underneath the skin
Mm-hmm.
and kind of wraps around the whole body. So that's superficial. And then everything else is deep fascia. So that's one way to remember. It's like there's superficial, it's that it's that bodysuit here sort of thing. And then everything beneath that is all deep fascia.
Okay.
Okay. Then I'm playing around with this slide. Have I shown you this one yet? That energy appears to run through fascia.
I don't think so. I don't think you had
Yeah.
developed it quite as much.
Yeah, probably not. So what I'm showing here, remember we've talked about what the postural wave is from the tailbone. You see my
Cursor.
cursor here? Yeah, from the tailbone all the way up that anterior longitudinal ligament.
Mm-hmm. I still want to know
Okay.
where it actually connects on the skull.
Oh,
But
well,
anyway.
yeah, it's interesting where it connects. Um, that's a really interesting little bit of anatomy, but we can go through it another time. Yeah, and I think probably everybody else is like, where does it connect into the skull? It's like, yeah, well, that's really interesting because where it connects into the skull, it also gives you entrance into the interior of your spine.
Hmm.
Cool stuff. It's just amazing how it just it goes this way and that way and dives in deep here, and because it goes up the front of the tailbone and then it eventually gets to that point at the base of the skull, and there's access through fascia there into the interior of your spine, your spinal canal,
Hmm.
and then that, of course, those are your meninges. You ever hear of your like meningitis?
I guess
Um,
I guess I've
they're
heard both of those, but I'm
Yeah, they're like a connective tissue tube that lines the interior of your spine.
hmm.
Wraps around your spinal cord, and it also goes up into your head, inside your skull, and it's the tissues that are around the interior of the skull, and then another aspect of those tissues um, wrap around the brain, separate out the hemispheres of the brain and different structures of the brain. You ever hear of the corpus callosum?
Mm-hmm.
That's actually the part of it's a white tissue, they call it, or white matter, and it separates the two hemispheres of the brain from one another, but there's a wealth of interconnections in between the two hemispheres of the brain, and they run through the white tissue, the corpus callosum, and so that's really cool. And women actually have better connections between the two hemispheres of their brains than men have.
Mm-hmm. And I
They
hear
have
crossing your midline with your limbs um, actually uh, does something to help the two sides communicate better.
Yeah, I believe so. So that's why yoga is really good for people, because you're doing all of these. You're crossing movements between one side and the other, right? Pretty cool. Between arms and legs, different sides of your spine, doing twists and things. So you're doing all of these exercises that are mapping your brain. Anyway, so that's really, it is a fascinating bit of anatomy there. I mean, we can have an effect into the interior of our spine, and even into the tissues that wrap around our brain and separate the hemispheres just by doing Mula Bandha.
Hmm.
Crazy stuff, huh? So anyway, I wanted to kind of start talking about, how do we use physical body to affect energy body, and how do we use energy body to affect physical body? So that's kind of a larger point that I'm introducing in this workshop is there's this connection. And I've been looking around on the internet to see if I could find anybody else writing about it at this level, and I can't find anything like this. But it's something that really my yoga mentor and I have talked about in the past, is that the level of interface between physical body and energy body appears to be fascia. So that's what I got. So up here I've got physical energy, or things like mechanical energy, moving the limbs around, gravitational energy, right? Gravity runs through our bodies. And then another thing that the physical energy in yoga practice is elastic energy. So we've talked about that.
I'm
So I
remembering
think
you
those are kind of the big three.
talking about, when we were doing with the weight, doing what you showed me last time I saw you. Um, this,
Mm-hmm.
you called that kinesthetic energy. So that would be like
Okay, kinetic,
kinetic. Yeah,
kinetic
sorry.
energy.
Kinetic energy.
Yeah.
Would that be like
Yeah,
mechanical, or
I
is that
was going to.
another?
Yeah, kind of. I was going to put that in, but it started getting too complicated.
Oh,
But kinetic energy is the energy of movement.
right.
Energy that comes into play when objects move.
So it's more like the mechanical of those three, I would say.
Yeah, it incorporates mechanical, gravitational, and
Sure.
elastic, but you add in the dimension of movement um, over time, right? So the equation has to do with mass and movement and mass and oh gosh,
Time.
I can't. Yeah, time, mass, the direction of movement and time. There's an equation I was looking at,
Hmm.
and I don't fully understand. So that was starting to get too deep into it. So I thought, well, I'll just go with physical energy, and within physical energy is kinetic energy too. Okay, so they're in the same realm, which is the physical realm. And then we started talking about, the esoteric realm, you know, astral energy, that thing. So we start talking about, physical energy, force energy, in parentheses, and have prana. And so prana provides the energy matrix that physical bodies are built upon, right? That's just basic yogic theory. Basic yoga theory is energy provides the matrix of everything in physical manifestation. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. It's too
you
bad
heard
this
that
the
too.
sound quality just went down. You're talking about really
Oh,
cool stuff. Prana provides the energy matrix that physical bodies are built upon.
yeah. And so I'm just, and that's everything in the universe, but we're just talking about, human bodies. Um,
Could you read that first line again? Sound got better.
oh, okay. So life force energy is prana, and prana provides the energy matrix upon which all bodies, all physical bodies, human bodies, the substance of the table that I'm sitting at, um, it provides that matrix of energy upon which everything in the universe is built. Everything in the physical material universe is built upon a matrix of matrices of energy. Yeah, but specifically in our physical bodies, there's an interface between energy and the physical human body, or even animal bodies. And I believe that that interface is between energy or prana and fascia, the connective tissues of our body. And so there's that interconnection there between energy and physical organic bodies, human bodies or other animal bodies, and that's through the fascia. And it seems to me that that's where how energy runs through our bodies. If through the substance of our physical bodies. Fascia doesn't really, prana doesn't really need to move through anything physical because it occupies space. It occupies what we would think of as empty space. We know through practices in our homes, like what's that called? In yoga, it's called vastu. In feng shui, right? Feng shui. From feng shui, we know that qi or prana or life force energy or spiritual energy flows through the whole planet, right? We know that you have to have a certain configuration between front door and back door of the house, and the configuration of your rooms and how you have objects placed in your room, because anything within a physical space that we build has a way within which energy enters that space and runs through it. And some things tend to be helpful to us, and other things tend not to be helpful through us. And through the practice of feng shui, that's placing furniture, physical objects, into that space affects how qi or prana flows through the space. And depending upon how that energy flows, it's either good or bad for you. And so in feng shui, they add things like mirrors and things into a room, or they'll place objects in the room in such a way that it helps to direct the flow of energy in your home or your office place or whatever. And so the energy runs in a similar way through our bodies, through the spaces in our bodies. And particularly with the deep front line in this image here, that is a big internal space inside of our abdomen and torso and mouth and skull that energy runs through. And we have spaces in between muscles too. The two muscles that are adjacent to one another lengthwise have a potential space between each of the muscles, and through that space, and that space is lined with connective tissues, fascia, and energy appears to run through those adjacent spaces. So if you look here at this drawing, I've got my cursor running here, right? You see this line of muscle here that I'm following? That's the psoas muscle. If we go over here, this is the inside of your pelvis. This is another muscle called the iliacus. And then there is a line right here along the edge, right between the two muscles. That's an area right between the two muscles where energy can flow. And then if we look here at the tailbone and the pelvic floor, we've got this red line that goes from tailbone all the way up to the base of the skull. And it's going to be back behind here somewhere where this guy's nose opening is. See, this is just all right here. That's just a part of the skull that's like tacked on. It's not really a part of the skull. It's the maxilla, and it's the jaw. Excuse me, the jawbone. But up here, see, up here, right along here, that's the skull. So back here behind this nose opening, all right, your nasal passage opening here, back behind that is where the C1 vertebra articulates with the skull, meets the skull and provides movement there. That's the base of the skull. So it's deep in there.
That's where the mouth of God is.
Yeah, and so back on the back side of the skull, there's the mouth of God. But this arrow that I'm showing, I'm just showing it going to the chin, but it could just as easily be pointed up to here. But that's,
I wonder if we could get an image of the front of the skull removed, like cut in half or something.
Yeah, I've got images like that. Yeah, I've got images like that. The problem is that it's hard to provide context that way, because for me, or maybe for you, you look at a picture of a skull, it's all cross-sectioned out and it's like zoomed into exactly the piece that we're looking at, and it's it's in cross section, and it's a close up, and you're looking at it, and an uninformed person would look at it and go, "What the hell is that?" Right? But yeah. So in order to provide context, you have to show a number of images of the skull
The
that
front of the
shows.
skull.
Yeah,
Well,
you have to show
I
the
get
whole
this,
skull, and then
I get this idea of making the front of the skull transparent, so that you can also see the back of the skull, but you can still get the transparent eyes and the nose. The front of the skull.
yeah. Wow, I know.
That'd be nice.
That's a skill set that's pretty unique for an artist, right? That's high end technical illustration or medical illustration. Yeah, I know it's cool stuff, but I don't think that comes cheap.
Well, send me the 2 images, and I'll see what I can do.
Okay, cool. So anyway, so this is trying to provide a context here for what I'm talking about. Energy appears to run through fascia, and so I just try to say what physical energy is, what life force energy is, how physical, and that physical energy can flow through these matrices of prana energy matrix and fascial energy or physical matrix.
Yeah, so you have energy in the second part, you have energy matrix in the first sentence and physical matrix in the second sentence.
Yeah. So trying to show that they're intertwined, aren't they? Gosh, yeah. I'm just going to put this down. Prana and fascia are intertwined. I'll probably change that somehow, but that's kind of the point I'm getting at, right?
I feel like it shouldn't be inset under life force, it should be like a separate paragraph or something.
Yeah.
Like a conclusion, kind of.
Yeah. Okay.
This always brings up a question. I'm just going to toss it out, and you can spend time on it or go on, or not. is the is Aren't all nerves embedded in fascia?
Yeah.
So my previous concept was if there's a physical equivalent, or not equivalent, but if we were to say, I've always thought of energy going through nerves, that's
Yeah, that's electrochemical.
Right.
Electrochemical energy. Well, yeah. Nerves have their own fascial matrix, and that the nerve tissue itself, like the axons and dendrites and all that stuff, the structure of the nerves, the length of the nerve, runs through a casing.
Which is fascia.
Yeah, and nerves and blood vessels all run through the same casing, like a wire harness. So we call those, what do we call those? We call those neurovascular bundles. Okay, and those neurovascular bundles also run through, in many places, fascial structures, other fascial structures. So I was pointing out the this the how the muscles might be separated out, right? In the iliacus and the psoas. Now I don't know this for a fact, but often these neurovascular bundles run in these kind of gutter regions between muscles. They're called septums or septa. So that provides like a conduit that the bundles, the neurofascial or the neural vascular bundles run through. So it's like, there's all these levels of containment and channeling that these structures run through.
And then there's the whole Chinese medicine meridian idea.
Yeah.
Which I wonder if anybody's ever made a
nobody's been able to
comparison of the fascia and the channel and the meridian channels.
Can't see it yet. Nobody's been able to see that. Probably largely because the way that scientists have been looking at that over the past. There was a news report in the last month or so that was talking about scientists who've discovered a whole new system in the body. And it was because of the way they were looking at it. They had never seen these channels within fascia before. Never been able to see these ducts and tubes and things that are formed in fascia that fluids run through. Never been able to see it because they, in order to study tissues, human tissues, they would use tissues that had either been preserved somehow with formaldehyde, or common practice in looking at any kind of tissue like cells and stuff is that they dope. It's called doping, and what the doping does is it's basically a dye that they dye the tissue with, so that the differentiation between structures, the colors between structures pop, so that you can really see a contrast visually in that image, which is great for some things, except it destroys the fascial structures. You can't see them once you dope the tissue. And so what these researchers decided to do was, instead of looking at the body that way, or these cell samples that way, was they decided, well, let's freeze the tissue. This is tissues that have not been preserved using formaldehyde or any other chemicals. They're just fresh from a cadaver. So they said, well, let's just freeze this, and then we'll slice it. And then freezing and slicing it, then they would mount it on a slide without doping it, and then look at it with an electron microscope, and then boom, there were the fascial structures intact. So they thought they discovered a body-wide network of connective tissues that nobody knew anything about, except bodywork therapists have known about this empirically for decades. But no, they discovered something entirely new.
Maybe centuries.
If we count yogis, millennia, thousands of years we've known about this stuff.
There's a certain intuition about, I'm sure bodywork didn't begin in the last, it's been with us probably forever. Touch much has always been with us.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's kind of what this slide is about. It's this is the centerpiece really of my whole premise.
Okay.
Is this interface between life force energy and physical energy. And so that's what everything really that I'm trying to think of, theorize about and present. It's all based upon this interface between physical energy and life force energy. And like I say, I've been trying to Google stuff, and I can't find anybody writing about this. So it doesn't mean somebody hasn't thought of it. I mean, it's like once I say it to somebody who studies yoga, they're just like, "Oh yeah, well that makes complete sense." But it seems so true, and yet it's one of those things, I guess, that's plain as day, that's staring us in our face, and yet we don't really get it until somebody else says, "Hey, did you ever think about this?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, that sounds true." Maybe it's one of those things. So then we talked about the energy of posture, right? Posture is self-sustaining. So you've seen this slide. It's the one that says holding your body stiff is not posture. Self-sustaining. So posture is self-sustaining and it's not static. It's always moving. It's always constantly moving. Just like your body, you cannot hold your body in a static posture, completely unmoving, ever, right? Can you imagine actually holding your body so still that there's no movement involved at all?
If the breath stops and the heart stops.
Yeah, or even with exactly, because your breath reverberates through your entire body, doesn't it? You take an inhaling breath, and that wave of motion from the breath will go all the way down to the soles of your feet and all the way up, into your head. So there's that, and then of course the movement of circulation throughout your body. You can't stop that unless you're dead. But even just trying to sit still, I mean, just set those other things aside. Set aside the heart moving, the breath and the heart, and just try to sit still, even for a fraction of a second. Just go ahead and sit still, close your eyes, and notice that your body's always moving, right? It's never stock still. Can you feel that? And hold your breath, and just try to sit completely still. And then you tune into it, and you're slightly swaying backwards and forwards and side to side and around, right? You can't hold your body completely still.
Reminds me of that sensation I told you about when I'm floating in water, and it definitely feels like I'm spinning.
Yeah, because you probably are at some level. So yeah, you can, and then if you try to really hold your body stiff, that's not posture, because posture is dynamic. It's always changing, it's always adjusting, and it has to be able to do that. Yeah.
I think that's an important point, that a lot of people would think that a perfect posture is holding the body stiffly, and that's a really good. Holding your body stiff is not posture. It's priceless. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's not possible. And once you start doing it, then what happens is your body starts to adapt to that, and you'll see like somebody who's been a lifelong soldier, right? And they've got that military bearing, that military posture. And that's not posture. That's the result of someone holding their body stiff in a configuration, and then their connective tissues have changed and gotten dense and hard and thick here and there and the other place, built in a matrix of connective tissues, and now that person is super stiff and unbending. And not only physically, but mentally too. And that's not posture, that's an adaptation. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you can adapt your connective tissues in a certain way that energy is going to flow through your body in very certain ways. And which means that you are you're limiting yourself to a certain expression of energy, aren't you? Maybe a person who's held themselves stiff that way their entire lives is less able to express joy than someone who hasn't. Or their energy is so channeled through that adapted fascia that their expression of physical movement is limited. Their expression of emotional movement is limited. Their expression of overall emotional makeup may be more towards anxiety or anger or fear, or conversely more channeled towards happiness and joy and openness. Right? And it has to do with, are you allowing your posture to be dynamic, ever-changing, and self-adjusting, or are you trying to change it and make it stiff and hard and channel it in that way? And that's why soldiers are taught to hold themselves at attention, because it changes them. It changes their brains, and they become suggestible to orders and obedient. Maybe that's pretty judgmental. Seems to be true, though. Yeah?
It'd be sad.
It is sad. That's I look at like I look at the TV and I see like scenes of soldiers marching down the street, like the May Day parades in Moscow, and you look at the way that they're marching and they do that horrible goose step thing, and they're so stiff. It's ugly. And it doesn't express the higher impulses of human nature when you look like that and you've built your body that way. In building your body that way, you've built your mind in that way. And in doing that, your expression of life force energy is perverted. Yeah.
It seems like that's a good example of the military posture, basically. But I also was thinking of it in terms of, it's not just the military that tries to force them. Lots of disciplines, even maybe yogis would attempt to what was that word? Value austerity and attempt to force posture and hold a posture statically.
Yeah, there is a whole dogma attached, I guess, to doing yoga poses. Tapas, yeah, right. But there's also like a way that that we're taught to hold yoga poses. Like you pull your shoulders back and down, and that promotes a certain kind of posture when they do that. And or like tucking the tailbone, that also promotes a certain kind of posture in yoga poses. And anytime that you impose that kind of stiffness into a yoga practice, then it's sort of diametrically opposed to the idea of yoga, because yoga is about creating balance and unity in your body. And if you're imposing a certain posture, a hard, stiffly held posture, like tucking your tailbone under really hard.
Wow, I just thought of something.
Yeah.
In Tai Chi, there's this yin yang, full, empty, and there's a constant moving of, like you're saying, for posture to be dynamic, it must be driven by and respond to energy flow. Well, you're going to have a better energy flow if you're relaxed, if as much of your body can be relaxed and capable of, instead of stiff, capable of being dynamic, because it can contract then. But if it's already contracted, then you're, of course you have to hold your body up, so there are things that are full, as they would say in Tai Chi, and then the opposite is empty, and then that alternates, that moves back and forth.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Promoting energy flow.
Yeah, in anatomy, it would be described as concentric and eccentric contractions of muscles. Right, and we've talked about how muscles are placed in the body such that you've got muscle control front to back and side to side, right? And in order to stand up, say you look at the person's thigh, in order to be able to stand up straight, the muscles in the front of the thigh and the muscles in the back of the thigh are firing. They're doing it dynamically. So you don't have like your front of your thigh completely contracted, and you don't have the back of your thigh completely contracted, because that would be holding yourself stiff, right? And so there's a dance between the two sides. So one side is letting go at the same time the other side is contracting. So there's a concentric means the muscle is contracting and shortening. Eccentric means the muscle is contracting, and while it's contracting, it's lengthening. And so there's this dance between two sides. So one side, and so it's constantly moving. You can't have a responsive posture. Let's call it responsive posture. You can't be responsive if you're holding yourself hard, right? You're holding yourself very statically. And this is the same for the outer thigh, right? The lateral part of your thigh and the inner thigh. Then those muscles have a relationship established between them as well. It's the same sort of thing. It's one side is contracting and shortening, and the other side is contracting and lengthening. And it's that dance between that's going on there. Fascially, though, we look at basically it's everything that's wrapped around the bone, front, back, side to side, all the myofascia. And we're not actually going, well, this muscle, that muscle, or the other muscle. It's just the whole of the tissue wrapped around the thigh bone, is the myofascia of the thigh bone. And it is interactively moving and changing dynamically and adjusting to keep you standing up in space responsively, so that you can respond rather than be locked into a position. And so that's posture. That's myofascial posture. So we don't think of it as this muscle or that muscle. You don't think of it as like, well, I'm holding myself up with my gluteus maximus, and therefore, since my gluteus maximus is working, then the muscle in the front, my rectus, my rectus femoris or my quadricep muscles are doing this at the same time. It's not that kind of a dance that's going on. It's like everything as a whole is shifting and moving and changing, and the muscles are individual bits and pieces of this whole, and they don't really work as individual bits and pieces. It all flows and changes all the way around the thigh bone as you're standing there, changing, dynamically changing and self-adjusting, and being able to respond in a moment's notice. That's how any animal, organic, in nature, animal, is in manifestation. They're always like very responsive. The difference between animals and us is especially pack animals. They can have somebody watching, and then everybody else just falls asleep. And I guess humans do that too. If we live in villages, or we live in troops or tribes. But anyway, so if you try to live authentically without adapting to rigid protocols, then you can be responsive and energy can flow dynamically and change and self-adjust in a very natural way. And that's kind of what we're looking at. Energy-driven posture is being able to stand with ease and in balance, or sit in that way, and sustain a configuration in your body so that gravity's not pulling you this way or that way out of that center line that we establish. Anyway, let's go to the next one.
Well, I don't know. It's just interesting because it reminds me of, wow, can you hear me? The sound changed.
Yeah, you're a little bit louder and it's better actually.
Huh.
I'm hearing you as stereo rather than mono now.
Oh, okay. It reminds me of two things that I found imbalancing and unpleasant in my life. One, as I was growing up, I remember I definitely felt a rebellion towards trying to, gosh, I don't know how to express it. I mean, there's a strong emotional reaction to trying to be forced into acting a certain way, I guess a lot of people experience that, but I mean, it's an emotional memory, so it's hard to express, but I think those are the best. And then the other one was, being on a spiritual path and trying to force myself to sit still on a bench in a crowd of people, quote unquote meditating, drove me nuts.
Yeah.
It was like, I can't meditate like this. This is not meditating. This is stiff. This is not.
Well, there's
no energy flow, and I never thought about that in that it's not living. It's not life. There's no energy. How can there be meditation?
Yeah. Well, there's this basic misunderstanding that we have in the West, and that is the difference between practicing a discipline and being disciplined, right? Being disciplined means that you're being held in line, right? Practicing a discipline, however, incorporates a whole menu of smaller disciplines wrapped within a larger discipline, and that discipline is to get you from point A to point B. Point A is having a really active, crazy monkey mind, like as they say, versus having practiced these disciplines. You can change the way in which your mind works so that it becomes more receptive, because you can quiet it, and in quieting your mind, you're able to notice or apprehend things much more
that are subtle.
Yeah, you can apprehend subtle things, subtle energies, if you have a receptive mind. And so you practice a discipline in order to become more than you are. So a discipline is a way in which you make yourself more receptive. Being disciplined, however, makes you more amenable to doing what somebody else wants to do with you. So being disciplined is in imposition. To practice a discipline allows you to transcend yourself.
Wow, I like that. Imposition. Have you ever heard of that word? Like stiff
Like
posture.
an imposition.
Stiff posture.
Yeah.
In position.
In position is an yeah. Is an imposition. Yeah, isn't that funny? Im and in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stiff
It's two
posture.
prefixes.
In position. Yeah.
Yeah, stiff posture in position is an imposition upon you and your energy.
Right.
And so we practice these disciplines not to have a disciplined, mind, or not to hold yourself static. It's so that you can become dynamic and ever-changing and self-adjusting.
To more subtle energies.
To more subtle energies. You become more aware of things going on around you.
I want to bring up, you've always emphasized we're not doing an exercise, we're doing a practice. So by practicing a discipline, I almost want to change the phrase and say, by repeating a practice.
Yeah.
Then we can have an experience, because we've become receptive, we've become pliable, we've become dynamic, we've become responsive.
Yeah, that ability to practice repetitively is a discipline.
Yeah.
But that's, the noun. Discipline. And not the
verb.
Not the adjective, not the verb, to be disciplined.
Right. Or to be, yeah.
I am practicing this discipline in order to become more than I am in this moment. Yeah, so that's the whole idea of the energy of posture, is it's transformative, isn't it?
Expand my potential, or transcend.
It's transcendent, it's expansive, yeah, it's transformational.
Express my potential.
Yes. Move it, ever expand into my potential. My potential is there. And how do I get from here into that potential? How do I move into potentiality? How do I express that? How do I get there? And you don't do it by being static and disciplined.
This is an
That's the
important
problem.
message. I mean, to people who want to perfect themselves. You could say people on a spiritual path, but also some runners, that want to transcend themselves, athletes, anyone who wants to express their potential or improve themselves.
Yeah,
It's so
the
important.
class. It is absolutely, and a lot of it comes down to your breath, how you breathe. Is also how you run energy through your body, both physically and energetically and spiritually. Physical breath can put you into different kinds of emotional states, can't it? If you breathe, have a deep breath pattern where your inhale and your exhale are the same length, that brings you into what we call parasympathetic nervous system response, right? Relaxation response. It's physiological. But we do that in yoga, don't we? We sit down in meditation and we breathe diaphragmatically, and we do pranayamas, right? The control of energy. Yama means control. Prana is life force energy. So pranayama, it's the control of prana within your body. And we do it by breathing, because prana is contained in oxygen and in the atmosphere. So we breathe that in, and then we have all these physiological things that go on in our bodies, but we're also moving pranic energy, spiritual energy, through our bodies too at the same time. So it's all about movement, isn't it? It's all about dynamism.
I have
And
something else I wanted to share with you.
yeah,
I saw this video on, I don't know if it was a massage therapist. I was looking for fascia banners and images or something. But there was, it was on Instagram, that's right. There was a post on Instagram, um, something related to fascia that was uh, jellyfish moving.
yeah, uh-huh,
And jellyfish are like a dome, right?
mm-hmm,
So um, we have that in our breath, in our diaphragm, right? Our diaphragm is, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in.
yeah, isn't that cool? I mean,
Breathing
yeah,
out.
if you think about, yeah, if the diaphragm is, quote unquote, a muscle, you know, and but that image of jellyfish is really provocative because yeah, you see how jellyfish will swim through the water, right? And how they're like a dome, and the dome changes dynamically. And if a jellyfish changes its orientation in the water, right? So it's like it's going up, and then it's going to go, you know, change direction and go to the side. It kind of goes diagonally, doesn't it? And then the whole shape and structure of the jellyfish changes. Right? The jellyfish changes its shape to change its direction.
And even to move.
And to move, it has to change its
Right.
shape. But the way in which it's changing its shape is like circumferential. And it's the whole jellyfish changes its shape when it moves. And that's what our respiratory diaphragm does too. And that's why it has the capacity of changing the shape of your lungs, right? Which is how air comes into your lungs. Is the diaphragm descends down, towards your abdominal cavity, and in doing that, it pulls on the tissues that wrap around your lungs, and it starts to lengthen your lungs and change the shape of your lungs. When that happens, it creates a vacuum inside of your lungs, and you open your mouth and air just rushes in because your diaphragm has done that. But at the same time, the diaphragm is doing other things. The diaphragm is maintaining posture dynamically at the same time that it's breathing you, bringing breath into your body. It's an amazing thing. And the only way to really fully apprehend that is to think about how a jellyfish swims in the ocean. Right? It's capable of so much movement. When we talk about muscles, we talk about contracting and relaxing. And it doesn't really work like that, does it? Jellyfish doesn't really work like that. I mean, sure, there's some contraction and relaxation going on, but how do you parse that out? You look at that and it's like this full body movement. And the jellyfish is round, in profile. If you look at it from the top or the bottom, how does it do contractions and lengthenings? It's like a I don't know, how do you describe it? But that's what our respiratory diaphragms are like that. We talk about, well, you need to contract your diaphragm and you need to let it go. And it forces us into a line of thought or a line of belief about the diaphragm that's not true.
It's interesting that the diaphragm has something to do with posture.
Yeah. It's amazing, but it does. It's a huge part of it. It's so intertwined with everything.
But the thing that's interesting about the jellyfish picture,
Mm-hmm.
she wasn't talking about the respiratory diaphragm. She was talking about the pelvic dome.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
that was interesting because one of the problems what was really interesting to me about that is one of the problems I had right in the beginning was I can't breathe in a relaxed way if I'm holding stiff
Mm-hmm.
my pelvic floor.
Well, you're not holding it stiff, though. That's the point. In doing your Mula Bandha and doing the practices, you're not, at first you hold it stiff, but you train it into this ability to work, to be working while you're doing the movements of the practices. Eventually, you can forget about holding a Mula Bandha because you've trained it to enliven, to actually work in a meaningful way.
To engage.
So it's not to engage in exactly the amount of engagement that's necessary for whatever you're doing. So it learns how to engage appropriately. But it has to engage, and it has to be dynamic, and it has to figure out how to support you in your movements. And that's why we do the practices on the football, because it trains your pelvic floor in how to move. Eventually, your pelvic floor is always going to be engaged, but it takes time in order to train it to do that.
You know what? It seems like I was just breathing and feeling my Mula Bandha and the pelvic floor, and it
Mm-hmm.
actually seems like, well, let's do it like oh gosh, can I do this? It seems like it's like they don't, are they parallel or are they, and it seems like that's what I want to do. So
Okay,
this is breathing. Let's see.
so yeah, so you're talking about the
Or
jellyfish,
maybe
and the person was talking about the dome of the
like they're opposite.
diaphragm
They're opposite.
having an effect upon the dome of the pelvic floor,
Right. And I'm trying to
and
see, is it
and
inhalation or exhalation where it's easier to, oh, but I guess what I've never thought of, I mean, I'm very familiar with this is inhalation and this is exhalation of the diaphragm, but when I'm engaging the pelvic floor,
so try
when
this.
is it a dome and when is it
So try this. Try this. Um, is the chair that you're sitting in have a fairly firm seat?
well, I can sit on the disc.
Okay. Well, no, not the disc, because the disc is going to absorb the movement. I want you to sit on something firm.
Okay, yeah, I can sit on the edge of the chair.
Okay. Okay. So now sit on your sits bones.
Hmm.
Okay. Don't hold your mula bandha, but also make sure that you don't dump. Okay. You know the difference between sitting on your sits bones and then just dumping it out.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So don't dump the energy of your pelvic floor. But then don't intentionally hold your mula bandha. All right. And now, do you feel firm in your sits bones?
Just sitting up straight is
Yeah. Is firming it,
right,
right?
right.
And it's making your pelvic floor fire correctly.
Hmm.
Okay. So it's being dynamic. So now, if you're able to feel and sense and visualize better closing your eyes, or if you can do that with your eyes open, whichever, adopt that. Close your eyes if you need to. And now, as you take an inhaling breath, feel your sits bones beneath you. And in particular, as you're breathing, notice if when you take an inhaling breath that the space between the two sits bones, see if that space lengthens a little bit as you inhale and then goes back again as you exhale.
That would be what I would expect, that the pushing down of the diaphragm, of the respiratory diaphragm, would also do the same. And I think that's what I'm feeling, but
Okay, so do you feel the sits bones go apart? And it's going to be just a few millimeters, tiny amount, but hone into your sits bones and make that your entire world. Okay, and then breathe, and don't try to do anything with your sits bones. Just breathe and feel how they respond to your inhaling breath and your exhaling breath.
the sits bones or the space between them.
Either, whichever you can feel and kind of measure in your mind. Can you feel a change either in the space between them or the physical sits bones themselves? It doesn't matter which.
It does feel like it comes up in when I exhale.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So when you're breathing in, you're sensing how you're sensing the elasticity of your pelvic floor as it stretches outwards.
Right.
When you exhale, you're feeling the elastic rebound
Mm-hmm.
of your pelvic floor as it pulls back in like a rubber band.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's one of the reasons why you're doing the football practice,
Is for building elasticity.
is to build that elasticity. Mm-hmm. But what you've got going on the pelvic floor is you have increased the energy there. Okay. In order for it to be elastic, there's that energy matrix upon which that pelvic floor is built. And you've increased the amount of energy in that diaphragm, that energy diaphragm. Which arguably is your root chakra, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, you feel that? Feel that moving and working?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons why you do that. Now, while that's happening though, while you're feeling the sits bones come apart and then go back towards each other again, while that's happening, there is a physical pull of tension on your anterior longitudinal ligament all the way up to the base of your skull.
I think if you actually, when I actually sit on my sits bone, where the center
Mm-hmm.
of gravity, the most pressure is on my sits bones, I don't feel as much movement of the bones. But if
Mm-hmm.
I just adjusted my seat and the pressure is a little bit more on my thighs than on my sits bone.
Yeah. Okay, that's sensing, but the thing is if you want it to work, truly work, then you need to be on your sits bones
Okay.
and not on your thighs. Okay.
That's a part of my morning practice when I'm done standing. Um, I sit on a wooden chair on my sits bones, and
Uh-huh.
that's when I really go into a meditation.
Yeah, because you've got the physical force of your body responding to gravity flowing upwards through your body, and that also helps you to assist the flow of prana up your spine too.
I guess I didn't.
So they're self-supporting.
I guess I didn't self-supporting, self-sustaining.
Self-sustaining.
Posture is self-sustaining.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I didn't realize until now that there's something about sitting right on my sits bones that I must have liked and I wanted to explore because I did that. I've done that every day since as a part of my meditation.
Yeah. Because it makes sense. Well, that's getting your energy right, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a lot
Cool.
easier to be posture and run the energy sitting on my sits bone than it is standing on my 2 feet at this point.
Yeah. Well, that's fine, so build that, and then try to bring that to your standing posture too.
Hopefully. That's a transcendence I have to make that seems like a big leap but that's what I'm going after.
Yeah, practice your sitting posture and then bring that to your standing posture. Yep. Yep.
Well, we haven't been through all of your slides. We're on slide 7, but it's been an hour and 15 minutes at least.
Yeah. Well, let's call that good for now.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'll see you Wednesday.
Yes. Very good.
And so we aim for the 1 o'clock again, or I think you said.
Let me take a look at my schedule.